I just think it's extraordinary what we're seeing here is a war between Queensland and the feds has opened up here. And part of that, I think, is probably the figures published in the front page of the Daily Telegraph in Sydney today, essentially having a go at the states, which one presumes come from the federal government. Ironically, I was after these figures from the federal government yesterday, never received them. But it is interesting to see that New South Wales, as well as Queensland, have only administered 50% of their doses. Now, is that because they've only got a lot of the doses this week, for example, or is it because other states, then Queensland, are taking this attitude that they cannot trust the feds to supply the second dose and therefore they have to hang on to it, in which case there's a complete mistrust between state and federal authorities as we seek to roll out this vaccine. And there was no question there from Queensland that they simply do not trust the Premier there and the Deputy Premier, the federal government, to deliver on their promises for vaccines. What a crisis for Federation, really, when it's such an important program for the future of the country. And we've seen the effect on the economy already in Brisbane, this vaccine rollout program. We're going to hear from Scott Morrison shortly. Boy, that'll be interesting in the wake of Stephen Miles's comments in particular. We're also going to hear this hour from Gladys Berejiklian, who will have to explain why New South Wales has also only allocated 50% of their doses so far.
I think it's important we recap some of those comments. Let's hear now from the Queensland Premier and her Health Minister on this issue.
Well, you asked them to tell me what is their continuity of supply. I think the public have a right to know. The public have a right to know the continuity of supply, and how about each week we get updated figures from the federal government about what the supply delivery will be.
What we've seen throughout this entire pandemic is every time the Morrison government wants to deflect from their failings, they launch an attack on the states and territories. We have not had certainty of supply to our hospitals through the vaccine rollout so far. That has required the holding back of enough doses to ensure that we can administer the second dose. I want to specifically address the particularly offensive remarks made by David Littleproud on the Today show this morning. He said that if the federal government needs to do better, then they should get an uppercut. Well, it's time he should give himself an uppercut. The states are doing what they can with what has been distributed to them.
Andrew, there's no doubt that the vaccine rollout has been slower than the governments at all levels would have liked. But when we do hear from Scott Morrison, he's likely to argue that a lot of that has simply been out of his hands. We know that the European authorities haven't helped the case here.
That's right. But if you make a promise, your job is to deliver. And have we been too narrow in only accessing 2 vaccines? Now, I want to be quick to say to our viewers here, Ash, that domestic production is coming on stream. There is a clear view in the federal government within weeks this will be resolved, because we'll be getting hundreds of thousands of doses a week from CSL of that AstraZeneca vaccine. But nevertheless, it does present some problems for Scott Morrison. Look, those figures today published by the Telegraph showing nearly every state is at 50% of the doses, apart from WA, I think it's at 60%, leads you to the logical conclusion that all of them are hanging on to the second dose because they don't trust the federal government to deliver. And that is going to be a very interesting question for Scott Morrison shortly.